Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188. Welcome to Gardening with Burke Nursery, the show where we help you grow your garden, increase the curb appeal of your yard, and share information on all plants. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris, the horticulturalist at Burke Nursery and Garden Center. You know, having the ability to walk around your yard and pluck fruit off a tree or berries off a shrub is so much fun. I remember when I lived in New England and would hike the White Mountains. One of my happiest memories was finding blueberry bushes drooping with fruit as I neared the summit. It'd be great. I'd just sit down and rest while I plucked some of the many berries to refresh my palate, and then I could continue my trek. Today, that memory still brings joy as I share it with others. And let us today discuss how to grow blueberry shrubs for your home garden. I love planting blueberry shrubs, especially here in Northern Virginia where I live. The soil here is extremely acidic, and the blueberries love having acid soil. As a matter of fact, they like pH of between 4.3 to 5.5, which is extremely acidic. The other thing about blueberries, as a lot of people know, they are considered a wonder food. They are high in antioxidants. They're wonderful in smoothies. They're great if you put them on ice cream. They're wonderful even in salads. So there's a wide array and a wide way that you can use blueberries as a food for yourself. The other thing about blueberries that's really great is that blueberries provide a lot of architectural interest in your garden. What do I mean? Well, this is a blueberry plant in the spring. And what you have here is you have all the flowers, you have the beautiful buds, and these are going to become not only flowers, but eventually they will become the actual blueberries. The other that's wonderful about the blueberry plant is that its leaves, and this is kind of coming out of winter dormancy, but if you look at the leaves will, in the winter months, actually the leaves will be lost in the winter months, but what will happen in the fall is that these leaves will turn gold, they'll turn red, they'll give you that beautiful, wonderful winter interest or fall interest that any tree that's losing its leaves gives you. So that is one of the great things. The other thing that's wonderful about blueberries is they can be planted anywhere that you have full sun. What that means is I can plant this in a full sun garden bed, or I happen to have a deck that has a lot of sun. And I like to plant a lot of my herbs and a lot of my edible plants in that location. So I will be planting my blueberries actually in containers so that I can put the containers out on my patio. Of course, not only do humans like blueberries, but wildlife, they like your blueberries too. So in my case, it'll be easier to control the deer and the rabbits from eating the blueberries by planting on my deck. But if you're going to plant them in your garden beds, then just before they actually come to fruit in the end of summer months, beginning of fall, then that's when you might want to cover them. The other is, when I say full sun, people will often ask me, what do you mean by a full sun garden? A full sun garden means a minimum of 6 hours of sun during the actual growing season. And of course, the growing season is anytime from April through the end of August into September. What I also like about blueberry shrubs is that they are what we call self-pollinating or self-fertilizing. That means that you don't have to have another blueberry shrub to get blueberries. You only need to have one blueberry shrub. It's great to have more than one. The reason is, of course, the more blueberry shrubs that you have in the yard, the easier it is for them to pollinate, but you don't need to have them. The one drawback to any of your edible shrubs or even your edible trees, and I'm talking apple trees, peach trees, cherry trees, blueberries, blackberries, strawberry, well, not strawberries, but your blackberries, your blueberries, or even your grapevines, your grapes, it'll take between 2 to 3 years of growth before you see any berries. And that's where people, they get frustrated because they're like, oh my gosh, I planted these shrubs and it's now next year and I'm not getting anything. Patience is the one thing that's required whenever you're planting anything like a blueberry or a raspberry or blackberry. As long as you have the patience, you're fine. Some people say, well, what about blueberries as far as what type of berries are there? First of all, blueberries are actually a native shrub. And the ones that are most commonly sold are what we call the northern highbush, or a cultivar of the northern highbush. There are other blueberries. The ones that I talked about when I was in New Hampshire and I was on the mountain climbing, those were the low bush. Low bush does much, much better in cold climates, and they're actually more common not only in the mountain regions of New Hampshire, but also Maine, Nova Scotia, and that parts up north. Finally, there's another one that is very common in the southern portions and does well South Georgia and south, and that is the rabbit eye blueberry. But what you'll find here in the Northern Virginia area is you will find the northern highbush. So one of the things that's important when you're planting is to prepare the soil. I actually recommend, if at all possible, to prepare the soil about 6 months in advance if you need to do that. What I do is I would recommend, if you're planting directly into your garden bed, to do a soil test. You want to make sure that pH is below 5.5. When you're getting ready to plant in your garden bed, you really want to make sure that your soil is acidic. So what you want to do is take the time to do a soil test. That means you want to see what the pH is, and you want that pH, as I already mentioned, to be between 4.3 to 5.5. If that pH is not between that 4.3 and 5.5 but higher, then there are various different elemental sulfurs that you can purchase at any store that sells garden goods, any of your nurseries, whether it's called soil acidifier, whether it's called sulfur, whether it's called pH down. There's various different products. It's best if you can apply those products about 6 months before you actually plant the shrub. So what that means is, if for some reason you test the soil just before you plant your shrub, then if the soil pH is not quite right, add it into the soil, and it'll take a while, but you can still plant your shrub. Just make sure you add some form of elemental sulfur into the soil. Blueberries also like to have fertilizer. And the best type of fertilizer for blueberries are acid-loving fertilizers. And there's several on the market. There's the Hollytone, there's the Mere Acid, there's the bumper crop Holly Azalea. But basically anything that you can fertilize, any azaleas that you can fertilizers that you can use for your azaleas, those are the fertilizers that you can actually use for your blueberries as well. One of the things that I really always am excited about is the fact that I can grow blueberries on my deck. As I already mentioned, my deck gets full sun, blueberries love that, and I can grow them in containers. So what I'd like to do is I'd like to share with you some of the secrets for planting your blueberries in containers to assure that they'll grow and produce fruit. What you need is you need a bag of sphagnum moss. And of course, you need a bag of potting mix. Here's why you need both. Potting mix has a pH of about 6.5, 6.7, 7.0, depending on the company and how they mixed up their potting mix. Sphagnum moss has a pH of 5.5 or less. So the sphagnum moss will give the blueberry the acid that it needs, where if you just simply use some sort of potting mix, you're not going to get the acid in the container that your blueberry needs. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to take your sphagnum moss, and very carefully, because sphagnum moss tends to be a little what I call powdery, and just gently put it in your container. And if you take a look here, you'll see that I have the sphagnum moss, which just likes to fall all over the place. I'm going to put this down here because that's it for the sphagnum moss. And the sphagnum moss is full of half of the pot. The next that you want to do is you want to take the potting mix, and you'll now fill the other half with the potting mix. And then what I like to do is I like to take my trowel, and as you can see, I have this almost all to the top. And whenever you're working with a pot, always try to leave at least an inch between where the soil line ends and the top of the pot, because that way when you're watering, the water's not going to overflow. And I just mix that. And then the other thing, and I forgot to mention this when it comes to even in your garden, what's really good, because blueberries do like the fertilizer, they like, as I mentioned, an acid-loving fertilizer. They also like either cow manure or chicken manure. This provides a real great fertilizer for them. To be honest with you, since we're in the studio, I am not going to open these bags and put them in. But what you would do is, this pot is about a 12-inch pot. And in the 12-inch pot, I would add about 1 cup of either the cow manure or the chicken manure. And then I would just mix that in. And also, I would add a little bit of fertilizer at this point as well. And again, just mix that in. And here we have it. This is ready for the final and most important ingredient. And what is that most important ingredient? The blueberry bush. This is actually, I like to call this a blueberry sapling. And you can get blueberries this size. you can also get the blueberries, which are your full shrubs. And I could also, if I wanted, I could take this full shrub and also plant it. But what I would do then is I would be planting this in a pot that gives me at least 3 feet depth and gives me, so about a 36-inch pot, which would be pretty tall. So it would be about 3 feet tall by almost 3 feet wide. But when it comes to a smaller blueberry, this pot size, this 12-inch pot size, is the right size. And as I plant this, I'll explain why this pot size is the right size for this particular blueberry shrub. And this one is the early blue. This is a very common blueberry shrub. It is a high bush shrub, which, as I already mentioned, that is the most common. And then what I would do is gently, these come wrapped so that the root ball stays together. And there are some places where you can order online what we call bare root shrubs. And if you decide to order a bare root shrub, what you want to do is when that shrub arrives, make sure that you put it in water because you never want those bare roots to dry out. And if I were planting this as a bare root shrub, then basically I would have put only half the amount in this, and I would have filled the container up only half the way. Then I would have put the bare root in, and then I would have finished filling the container. But in this case, this has the soil and the peat moss surrounding it, and you just need to be, my experience with these is that you need to be a little gentle in how you pull them out. Otherwise, the roots start, the packing material starts falling apart, and I don't want that to totally happen. So as I gently pull it out of here, I put it into the pot. We don't need this material anymore. And then I just plant it in the pot. Now, the next question then is how deep in the pot do I want to plant this? And what I want to do is basically plant it even with how it came in the container. I don't want to plant this any deeper. And then, in this case, I planted it a little higher, so I'll just need a little more soil here. Just pack it down a little bit. And again, if you look at this, you'll notice that I've left about an inch deep right here. And again, the reason that I did that is when I water this, that water isn't going to run over. That water is going to go into the container properly. There is one thing that I have found when I'm planting the blueberry shrubs. Because I'm using half peat moss for the acidic soil, the peat moss operates a little differently when you water it. So what you'll find as you water this is that that water will kind of congregate on the top of the soil for a while. And so you don't want to keep watering it to the point that you have water overflow. Otherwise, that'll be too much water in the long run. What you want to do is you'll want to water the top, just kind of watch and see what happens with that water. And then that water will slowly percolate into the soil. And after that, what you would do is just take your finger and put it down into the pot several inches to see if that is moist. And if that's moist, then you've watered it enough. If it's not moist, then just water a little bit more, and you're all set. Then, of course, the question is, how often do I water it? Well, blueberry shrubs don't really like to dry out, so you want to keep it moist, but on the other hand, you don't want to overwater it. And one of the things I had mentioned is that after I planted this, I would explain why I used a pot this size. You don't want, a better way of wording this is that as this grows, this pot will become too small, because as it grows, eventually it'll go into this size, and eventually this particular one will go a little taller. As a matter of fact, if you were to read this will actually grow about 6 feet tall. So a 6 foot tall shrub, I can keep it down by pruning it, but a 6 foot tall shrub will definitely eventually be too small for this pot. But when you buy a plant that's small, you want to make sure that the depth of the pot isn't too large, because otherwise what happens when a pot is too large, and I mean too long for the plant, then you keep watering it and you keep watering it and you keep watering it, because you're not seeing any water on the surface, and what's happening is all the water is collecting at the base of the pot, and then you can end up with root rot. Not something that you really want. So right now, this little plant is very, very happy in this pot size. And when she grows to be the size of this other blueberry shrub, then I will start looking at transplanting her into a pot size literally double the size. Blueberry shrubs love to grow. And what I mean, they love to grow, whether they're in the ground or in a container, they love to grow a lot of branches. And so what that means is that if the branches are too many, and if they're too close to each other, you could end up with different problems. You could end up with fungal infections. You could end up with not enough air circulation. You could even end up with the crop not growing quite the way that you want it to grow. So pruning is part of having blueberry shrubs. The best time to prune is when what we call they're dormant. That means they're not in their growing season. So that would be around the end of February, beginning of March, usually before what I like to say St. Patty's Day, usually before mid-March, because a lot of things start budding out in mid-March. And when I'm looking at a shrub to prune, the first thing, of course, you want to make sure that you have your pruners. And what I always do before I use my pruners is I take 70% rubbing alcohol, and I clean my pruners and sanitize them with the rubbing alcohol. Then the next thing that I look for when I'm looking at my blueberry shrub is I'm looking to see if there are any dead canes. If there are any dead canes, and you can tell because obviously with this shrub, this is a very healthy, beautiful shrub, so it's very much alive, very happy. But you do what I call the scratch test to see if the cane is dead, which means you gently take your thumb and you just scratch the cane, and if there's green under the cane may look dark, it may look brown, but if you scratch it and there's green there, then that cane's alive. So you may want to leave that cane. But if you scratch it and it's brown under there, then that cane is not doing well and it's time to remove the cane. Then the next thing that I look for is I look for what I call crossover branches. Crossover branches are branches that literally touch each other. So if I go in here, basically there's a branch that's crossing over. It's touching another branch. So this would be a branch that I would remove. And as a matter of fact, when I buy a new blueberry bush, I actually look to see if there's any crossover branches, because sometimes I will decide to do a little pruning after I plant the shrub to get rid of some of the crossover branches. It's not as critical when you first purchase the blueberry shrub to do that. And the main reason is, as I've already mentioned, it takes 1 to 2 years before you start getting any fruit on your shrub. So this won't interfere per se, but it could in the long run. So what I would do is I would just take my pruners, and before I do this, where do you prune? Well, if you take a look at any branch, you'll see, or any cane technically is what this is called, you'll see that there is an area where this comes into a larger branch, and I call that the crotch. And those are the areas where you want to do any pruning, at least with the blueberry shrubs. Well, with almost anything that you prune. You really want to prune in the crotch area. And the reason for that is that will heal itself, so you don't have to worry about creating any problems or insects. And all I would do is just snip this branch with my pruners, and we're all done. And then I'm ready to have a beautiful blueberry shrub that gives me the fruit I need in the summer and fall months. So the world is wide open with possibilities if you want to increase the amount of food sources that you can create from plants, trees, and shrubs. Blueberry shrubs are one of the most versatile of all shrubs that produce fruit. You can eat them right from the shrub, you can create various dishes and desserts, and they're even great in your smoothies. So whether you have a large yard or a small deck or a porch, growing blueberries is easier than you ever realized. Give it a try. You'll be happy you did. I'm your host, Misty Kuceris. If you have any plant or gardening questions, contact me at misty@burkenursery.com. Thank you for spending your time with me here at Gardening with Burke Nursery. I'm looking forward to helping you grow your garden.
Funding for this program is made possible by Burke Nursery and Garden Center in Burke, Virginia. You'll find trees and shrubs, perennials and annuals, water garden supplies, houseplants, and bird and gardening supplies. Burke Nursery also provides landscape, plant diagnostic, and installation services, and much more. For more information, you can check out their website or call 703-323-1188.